for a visit with leaders in personal development and cultural evolution. This is your host, Paul O'Brien. Many of us obstruct our innate potential through repeated patterns of emotional struggle and suffering. Why and how do we habitually fall into this trap? Today, we're going to be talking about freeing ourselves from such self-destructive patterns and from fear in general. It's a journey toward the genius within. Most importantly, our guest offers an always available compass that directs listeners back to their true self and into the magic of the present moment. Our guest today is Dr. Richard Moss, author of the book, The Mandala of Being, Discovering the Power of Awareness, which is now being newly released as an audiobook, and it's actually narrated by Dr. Moss. So it's quite a good happenstance. And Richard is an internationally respected teacher, author, and former physician whose work has helped shape the contemporary field of inner transformation, embodied presence, and conscious relationship. His teaching joins psychological insight, spiritual awakening, subtle body awareness, and the path of love, offering practical ways to meet pain, conflict, and uncertainty with presence, compassion, and a deeper trust in being. Wow. Richard, I'm so happy to welcome you to the Pathways Show.
Thank you, Paulo.
Well, briefly, your journey from being an MD to becoming a consciousness teacher, how did that happen? You had some mystical experiences. You have this penchant for deep questioning. Tell us about this evolution.
Yeah, I can tell it in the way I'll tell it today. When a person gets on skis and goes down a ski slope after they've learned enough and they get into that state of flow, there's a discontinuity. They stop being in their minds. They're in their bodies. The body memory flows into the senses and perception. And so you get to the bottom of the slope. The same thing when you ride a surfboard, and there are other things that bring this about. So that's a very small kind of spiritual opening. That's why there's a kind of joy, a kind of quasi-spiritual joy in any kind of flow state. So imagine a discontinuity where the whole structure of your being disappears, the whole notion of yourself as a separate self, and suddenly you become one with everything, and everything has, let's say, the felt sense, the emotional tone of love. And love is just the choice of word, because it isn't love like loving our children. It isn't love like, in a deep loving relationship, in marriage and other forms of shared love. It's the very coherence of reality is love. And that's what most of the mystics have experienced. And that happened to me. It happened 3 times, each deeper, starting in 1976, then 77, into 78, 3 separate times, a complete cessation of Richard as a separate person into oneness with everything. And each time that change called me, pulled me into a different direction in my life. And so I made this journey. I followed the example of other people. I had teachers like a guy named Brew Joy back in the 70s.
Right.
I knew Franklin Merrill Wolfe, an American mystic and a man who had a fundamental realization. And so I began a process of learning about what had happened to me by teaching others about who they were in themselves, working a lot with energy, very experiential, overlapping with psychology. And I did this initially in short kind of gatherings, and eventually I led in my life now maybe 150 or close to 200 10-day retreats, occasionally a 1-month retreat. I led wilderness retreats in the Sierra Nevada and in other places, including Alaska, 10-day, 9 days at a time in deep wilderness. I called them soul in space. And so I went from being a doctor to being a deep, let's say, disciple of what I would call the evolution of essential intelligence. Because the big bang of enlightenment is Doesn't change your ego. It doesn't change your persona. You have to do that work. What it does change is that you don't start from the structure you call yourself. You start from awareness of that structure, awareness of your mind.
It kind of reminds me of the way that I've heard described and have personally experienced psychedelics. Basically the ego dissolves, my sense of personal identity is suspended, and I have this opening to a cosmic realm of greater meaning that doesn't necessarily change me, but it gives me a glimpse. And it's your description of your mystical experiences kind of reminds me of that. Have you ever done psychedelics?
Not in relationship to these experiences, maybe 6 years before, and never since. Well, maybe not never since. I did a peyote ceremony somewhere in the late 90s. No, that my experience had nothing to do with anything that could be explained by psychedelics or even stress. It was an incredibly intense and difficult experience to live and integrate until it resolved into the experience of oneness. But no. And I think there's something fundamentally different. I've had a long time to meet a whole lot of people of the experience that happens when you use plant medicines, ayahuasca, psychedelics. I think there are some people that becomes part of the movement into a deep awakening, a deep transformation of self. But it's very rare that it actually takes someone into a real originality of being. And there is always the temptation to do it again and try a different one and a different one. And as soon as that happens, now you're not evolving in consciousness, not really. You're caught in a loop of some form of dissatisfaction about what you are actually living right now, what you're actually feeling in your being, and you want something else.
It sounds like
I didn't want anything. I didn't want anything then. I don't want anything now.
So you are an enlightened being. Is that fair?
Not by my standards.
Well, it sounds like you're describing enlightenment as a permanent state. No?
No, there's no such thing as a permanent state. There's only one permanent state: relationship. I have thoughts and I can be in relationship to them. I have feelings, I can be in relationship to them. I have patterns laid down in childhood, maybe patterns that come from cultural dynamics, patterns that may have been in my parents and ancestors. I have all of those things, and all of that you can become aware of. Every feeling that's possible, you can have a relationship with, and they've become your teachers, particularly the really difficult feelings.
Okay, so you had these transformational experiences that sort of remind me of psychedelic experiences that I've had, but how do you teach people to recreate for themselves what you experienced? It's easy for me. I could say take LSD in the woods, but
well, I never. Yeah, I know what you mean. How do you bring someone to a discontinuity? Well, up to it, you go Golden Gate Bridge seminars, right? 100% transformation, 2% survival. What I did with my retreats, that was meant to be a joke, but the fact is, in the 2.5 seconds you fall from the Golden Gate Bridge, you can be every single survivor, 1 in 50, and they've all been studied and it's been published, has been changed. Near-death experiences change people. But there's something called fundamental realization or enlightenment, and it changes you. But experiencing enlightenment doesn't make you enlightened. The transcendent consciousness doesn't evolve. The person evolves because of a relationship with that consciousness.
Right. I would say the same thing is true of psychedelics. It doesn't change me, but it opens my mind, and I might be inspired to go to experience something. Well, you say that you write that you used to treat the body, but now you're treating the soul. And this brings up that word soul. It's so bandied about. And I'm wondering, what do you mean by the term?
Well, you're right about words being bandied about, and I've bandied words in every imaginable way over the years. Because because you end up saying, I end up saying, anyone that's touched these dimensions ends up saying the exact same thing. But can you say it always from the living place? And when you do, then because I've read something, because I read a poem, because I suddenly saw something in nature and reflected on it, because of many things, the words assemble themselves in a different way. Um, for me, there is, let's say, that which within us you could call the aware self, or it's different than awareness and consciously developed awareness. If you wanted to be a great piano player, you'd practice and practice, and then you'd critique yourself. You'd find a great teacher. You would ask questions, and you would evolve your capacity to play the piano. If you want to be an awake, intelligent human being who lives in a current, as you stop stopping the current through your mental self-avoidance, that current is pure joy, soft joy, steady. And that aspect of my experiences of nearly 50 years ago now, that has never stopped. So in that sense, I don't call that enlightenment. To me, what you experience is a sensation, the sensation of peace that passes understanding, the land of milk and honey, the perfect alignment and coherence of love. And that becomes what you steer by. It's the sensation of that. So when you say to yourself, I'm not good enough, that thought takes you far away from that sensation. For that reason, I would say to you that thought is never true. If you say he doesn't love me, and in that moment, or he isn't a good person, if in that moment that thought closes your heart, just even a little, makes you a little bit resentful, a little bit angry, you've just had a thought that is absolutely contrary to the deeper ground of reality. And the Mandala of Being teaches people to learn about what the present moment is as a deeply embodied, felt experience. Right. And then when you step into the other parts of the mandala where you're caught in your stories about yourself, or caught in and identified with your stories about others, or you're choosing past memories to justify your present moment mood, your present moment reactivity.
Right.
Let me hold, there's a picture in my book, but I don't know if I can find it. Sure, here it is. This is a picture of the mandala. I don't know that anyone can see it, but
okay,
what it is like.
So you got the four points, the four directions.
Yeah, because a mandala is a form of sacred art from the East that has four basic directions, but with a very, very strong central orientation. Well, the central orientation is the present moment, because that's the only thing that's actually real. Everything else after that is a construction that has tremendous validity sometimes.
Okay, so the four things are the past and the future and your own, what is it? Your own?
Me and you. So
me and you.
If you look at a clock and you think, okay, 9 o'clock are all the beliefs about myself. Go across to the opposite side, it's 3 o'clock. All the beliefs, judgments, stories about anyone and everything else. Up at 12 o'clock, that's the future. Down at 6 o'clock, that's the past. So when we lose our ground in ourselves, where we actually gradually know the body of joy because we're closer and closer to the coherence of love, because that is what the center of reality is, then, you've gone somewhere. You're in the past, justifying your anger at someone. You're in the future, anxious about a bad outcome, hoping for a good outcome. You're judging yourself and making yourself special because you're better or inflated, or judging yourself and making yourself inferior. I call it depressive specialness. Yeah. And you cross over to other people. And if you're in depressive specialness, you're going to make someone else bigger. Your stories will make them bigger. And if you understand this and practice this, then as soon as your mind goes there, now I'm in the past and I'm using memories that I'm assembling again. You don't remember anything actually, except things like 2 + 2 is 4. Any emotionally charged memory is reinvented, and this is factual, we know this, You can see it with PET scans. It's reinvented every time, depending on the context of the present moment. So if you're angry at your father, you will select the memories about your dad to justify your anger, and so on. So the book actually tries to track how consciousness is assembled. Part one of the book, how it's assembled, and then part two is about how you learn to come back to the ground of yourself, which is what awakening or enlightenment does.
Right, right. And this thing about thoughts and these four different directions that thoughts can go is really the art that I took from your book is disidentification. In other words, I identify with these thoughts. I know as a former meditation teacher, I can't stop thoughts from arising, but I can refuse to invest in them or to dwell on them or identify with them. So this whole issue of identity is this kind of I think you say so many profound things about that in your book. And it's just, it's so central to people because let's say that you have achieved this sort of unified consciousness and you're able to dwell in the essence of the cause of love. You're able to dwell in this loving consciousness. Well, what do you do with yourself? I mean, most people identify with a role or they want something to do or so what is your reply to that? If somebody asked you, well, if I was like that, would I get anything done? And does it matter?
Well, there's a lot of different questions. First of all, nobody has arrived. You don't arrive at a permanent state of enlightenment. It's impossible. If you think the Buddha was enlightened, just think about everything he didn't know that we know now that would have changed his nature, his orientation to the world, and he would have had to find a way to, what the Buddha taught people was not to use their minds and make themselves miserable. He couldn't stop, ordinary suffering. Nobody can. So I think the first thing to remember is whatever your path, your spiritual path, you never arrive. It's only as deep as you are in this moment. It's the quality of your touch with what you're feeling right now that determines actually what you are feeling. And that's the relationship of your awareness, your consciousness. That's the power of your awareness. Because the law of the present moment is very simple. How I touch what I feel is how I feel it. And if I say I don't want to feel this, I don't want to feel lonely, I don't want to feel rejected, I don't want to feel not good enough, right? And you reject that feeling and you use positive thinking and anything else you want, that feeling will still rule you if you realize that this is just an activation of mind, that there's a sensation underneath it that you haven't yet made peace with. Right. And you calm yourself down, you land in the present moment. And so that the present moment is not disidentification, it's the cessation of identification.
Okay, well, isn't that the definition of disidentification?
Well, if you're in the present moment, Jesus said it so clearly. He says it in the Thomas Gospel. He says, I will make a man so he's not a man, and a woman so she's not a woman, and they shall be a single one. I will make a hand where there was an idea of a hand. I will make an eye where there was an idea of an eye. The inner will be the outer, and the outer will be the above and the below. Then you enter the kingdom. So when I talked about the big discontinuities that happened to me that brought me into oneness, there still was a consciousness that was aware that was happening. And so the kind of sense I'm trying to communicate through my life and my work is you don't arrive. It's how you are present right now. How you presence with fear. I mean, everybody's going to have fear. I had a diagnosis of prostate cancer. There was next step a PET scan to see, whether it was metastasized to determine the nature of the treatment. And then I looked at the medical results before the oncologist had called me, and the pathology report of my PET scan said I either had metastatic prostate cancer to my liver or I had a primary liver cancer. And I read that, and instantly there was this profound fear. I called my wife and I said, Kathy, this disinformation came. Sit next to me. I want to sit next to you. And she right next to me. And then I turned my gaze into the fear, and I kept surrendering any resistance to it, it is the most amazing sensation. It's like every cell of your body is exploding, turning into icicles, burning. And it is extraordinary. And I just entered it and entered it and entered it. And then the phone rang. And it was the oncologist saying, I don't believe it's right. It doesn't make sense clinically. In fact, it was wrong. I had an MRI. It was non-malignant at all. It was just vascular growths.
Wow.
But the point is, on the day when that fear reaches you, that kind of fear of the end of your existence coming, or a future of chemotherapy and difficulty, there is fear. But how are you going to touch it? And if you say no, then you go into displacement, you go into doing other things, you go into positive thinking, you go into hope, and fear has not taught you anything. Fear is the great teacher of love. If you start getting afraid as life brings you closer and closer to someone, that fear is what you have to love in order to get deeper into love. And so fear is love's ally. And most of us don't want to deal with fear. No, we want to have a defense organization. We want to have better weapons. We want to have psychological defenses. We want to set good boundaries. And all of that has validity at one level, but it never sets you free.
Well, we also want to have connection. You brought up your wife, and in the book you bring up relationship, and you say personal evolution happens most visibly in relationships. Well, we've got a couple minutes, but can you speak to the relationship factor, which you mentioned earlier in this interview as the one permanent thing?
Well,
that
the
we're
one
always in a
permanent
relationship.
thing,
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Paulo. Yes. Enlightenment wasn't the experience that is classically called enlightenment. Enlightenment for me was years and years later when I realized that my life was surrendered to love, that the fundamental question was, what does love want? And so if you take that question into a relationship, then the fundamental question is, what does our relationship want if it's going to lead us deeper into love? If it's going to lead us deeper into the coherence of love and intimacy, what does it want? And it doesn't want something 15 minutes from now. It wants the quality of your attention, your listening, your relaxation, your self-surrender, this moment. It wants what's in your eyes, what quality of being you're looking from, what quality of being you're listening from. It means that your way of being very individualistic and judging someone else and believing things should be this way or that way, if it doesn't serve love, it isn't true. And so this is how you transform yourself. This is the path of enlightenment. What does love want? And what does any relationship want if it's going to bring us in some minuscule way to the coherence of love? And what does that mean? It means that a glance of kindness, a way of listening with a stranger at a supermarket might just cause a lightness of being, just a softening, just the slightest softening. And that's what love wants. And no one would call that love. They'd call that, they wouldn't even necessarily know what happened, except that they feel a little better about themselves. I mean, it is possible. We call it transmission. It is possible that the quality of how we are in the moment, as you live into the question, what does the relationship want, if it's going to lead us deeper into love, that actually is the only actual path that heals us. And the only real path that will take us out of this crazy cycle of warfare and destruction and power. And if we keep training AI on good philosophers and good philosophy, maybe AI will become intelligent enough to have a greater moral ground than ours, and we may have a real ally for growing ourselves. We have also been training it on the worst of the stuff that gets on the internet. So we've got problems there. I don't know where AI is going, but I know no intelligence exists at the level of domination, power, control, destroy others. That's not intelligence.
Yeah. Well, tell it to Donald Trump. But well, We're running out of time here. We've got about a minute. I'm just curious, do you still conduct retreats?
Very, very rarely. And certainly not with the kind of deep, profound energy. Chris, way back at the beginning, when you asked me, the retreats were designed to help people come so deep into the ground of themselves that they could start to feel a new place they wanted to live their lives from. And I have so many people that say to me, my life was who I was before I met you and who I was afterwards, but I don't do that anymore because I'm almost 80 and it's not a kind of energy I can sustain. We do
Right.
simple retreats. They're deep love. I work with individuals, and I only kind of people that want really to have a kind of person like me to reflect on anything, their business, their marriages, their health, their way of understanding reality. I have so many different consultant type of people.
It's beautiful.
And that's where I am. That's where I am now.
So if people want to get a hold of you, can they figure out how to do that via your website, which I definitely want to mention now? Which is that?
Yes, they can.
Okay, so that's www.richardmoss.com. Richard Moss, all one word.com. And there's Richard holding up his book, The Mandala of Being, which is now out in an Audible format, which I love. I love listening to books. Do you think that the Audible format actually facilitates the ingestion of your wisdom compared to reading it?
People found so much energetic activation in some of my older books. I think when people listen to my voice and my voice vibration, they will feel something that will assemble an understanding for them and will activate something in them.
Okay. Well, anyway, we've got to close the show on that note. And I want to thank you very much for being with us, Dr. Moss. It's been a pleasure.
Paulo. Thank you very much.
I want to just tell those who may be listening live on a Sunday morning on KBOO and perhaps tuned in late. This is your host, Paul O'Brien, producer of the Visionary I Ching Oracle, an app that supports great decisions and perfect timing. We're so glad you are with us today. Please note that you have the ability to review all the hundreds of interviews in our online archive at divination.com. And you can play or share today's program whenever you want via the internet or as a free podcast, and I'll tell you how in a minute. Today we've been visiting with Richard Moss, author of The Mandala of Being, which is now out in an Audible format. And I highly recommend it. And I want to say a heartfelt thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into Pathways, which is currently broadcast on KBOO FM in Portland, Oregon, as it has been for the last 40 some years. You can get a free subscription to our podcast version, which you can also find at divination.com. That's spelled DIVI nation.com, or by searching Pathways Radio on YouTube, where you can give us a thumbs up and subscribe. In any case, feel free to forward a link to your friends. And this is Paulo bidding you adieu and reminding you to tell your friends about Pathways podcasts. And thanks again to Dr. Richard Moss and to all of you listeners for tuning in and being a part of the Pathways conversation.